The meeting was tense. War maps lit the room in red, and the air was thick with sweat and cigarette smoke. One by one, generals delivered their reports. Numbers, strategies, statistics. Cold, clean, detached. Then Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood. He didn't speak in numbers. He spoke in names. He listed villages, border hamlets, places no one in that room had ever visited, but where children were already hiding in basements, where elders slept in shifts because gunfire echoed in the distance each night. "They will be hit within the week," he said, voice steady. "We've intercepted chatter. They're planning coordinated raids. If we don't act—" A chair scraped back. A general in a tailored uniform raised his hand, signaling enough. "We're not babysitters for farmers, Captain." Traoré blinked. "With respect, sir, these are citizens." "If we listened to every frightened villager," the general cut in, voice like steel, "we'd have no army left. Learn the difference between fear and intelligence. That will be all." The room fell silent. No one looked at him. He sat down, but he didn't shut up. Because while the brass dismissed his warnings, Ibrahim Traoré acted. That night, he met with 3 junior officers who trusted him. No orders, just a plan. They assembled 2 mobile squads. Light arms, rapid deployment, nothing official. Over the next week, those units patrolled village roads the generals didn't even know existed. They set up night watches, distributed emergency radios, trained farmers in basic defense. And when the raids came, they were ready. They repelled the attackers in 5 separate villages. Civilians survived. Children lived. The capital never heard a word of it. But the villages did. In their stories, Traoré wasn't just a captain. He was the reason their homes still stood. And slowly, word spread. A quiet tide of respect rising from the margins. He didn't brag. He didn't report his success. But the people remembered. And 2 years later, when the tide turned and power shifted, it was their voices, those once ignored, that carried him to the top. Because leadership isn't about commanding attention. It's about choosing again and again, not to abandon the people you're sworn to protect. They called him soft. That's what echoed through the corridors after that meeting. Not brave, not principled. Software among the ranks of power showing concern for villagers, unarmed, poor, rural, was a sign of weakness. Real commanders talked strategy, airstrikes, territory, not barefoot children and burnt rice fields. So they laughed in private, shrugged off the rumors, changed the subject when junior officers brought up Traoré's warnings. But far from the capital, while they polished boots and planned briefings, he was moving. No orders, no headlines, just him, a few trusted men, and the people everyone else forgot. The mobile units he deployed had no insignia. They slept on dirt floors, ate what they could find, and took shifts guarding homes that weren't theirs. They didn't march. They blended. And the villagers? They didn't ask for credentials. They opened their homes, shared food, drew maps in the dirt, showing where the strange men had come before, the ones with guns and cruel laughter. Traoré listened. He taught them how to build barricades with sandbags and wood, where to place scouts, how to signal danger with mirrors, with fire, with silence. In one village, a boy handed him a drawing, stick figures with rifles, standing between two burning houses. He pointed to the figures in the middle. "That's you. You stopped them." He didn't frame the drawing. He folded it and kept it in his jacket. The attacks came as predicted. Fast, coordinated, brutal. But this time they weren't met with panic. They were met with resistance. From tree lines, from rooftops, from narrow alleyways where villagers had rehearsed how to strike, then vanish. Several attackers were captured, their weapons seized. Not a single civilian was killed. There were no medals, no applause, just tears, hugs, and stories told by firelight. They called him the captain who came in the night. And as more villages joined the whispers, something rare began to grow. Hope, not blind hope, earned hope. And in dusty courtyards, farmers spoke the name Traoré not like a soldier, but like someone they trusted with their future. He didn't report back to headquarters. He stayed where he was needed, because to him, protecting a forgotten village meant more than impressing a forgotten general. News never traveled fast from the borderlands, but stories did. They moved in silence, by truck drivers, by traveling merchants, by school teachers who remembered the man with the quiet voice and steady eyes. "Captain Traoré," they'd say. "He came when no one else would." And while officials in the capital sipped imported whiskey and dismissed rural pleas as distractions, something was shifting underfoot. Traoré had created more than protection. He had sparked connection. Across dozens of villages, a web of coordination took shape. Volunteers relaying information, scouts monitoring movement, former hunters teaching tracking. It wasn't a military network. It was a community defense born from respect. And Traoré, he stayed in motion, sleeping where he was needed, eating with the people, speaking little, listening much. He didn't just defend, he restored, helped rebuild broken wells, arranged medical deliveries, organized the transport of children to schools that still stood. One afternoon, an elder approached him with tears in his eyes. "My grandson says he wants to wear a uniform like yours one day. Not because it's powerful," he said, "but because it means protecting people." That night, Traoré sat alone under a tree and unfolded the child's drawing again. He stared at it for a long time. Meanwhile, back in the capital, trouble was growing. Reports of successful civilian resistance began surfacing. Arms smugglers captured, attacks thwarted. It didn't match the official narrative. Commanders grew uneasy. They summoned Traoré, demanded answers, asked why his units weren't filing standard reports, why he was out of position, why villagers were speaking his name. He gave them none. He simply said, "If you had listened in 2022, we wouldn't be here." They called him insubordinate, threatened to reassign him, strip his command. But they were too late. Because the army wasn't just watching now, it was listening. And many had seen what Traoré had done, not with orders, but with presence. The quiet loyalty he'd cultivated had roots, and it wasn't growing in the shadow of power. It was rising beneath it. Across rural garrisons and small towns, soldiers began asking each other, if everything he did was wrong, why did it save so many? By the time 2024 neared, one truth had become undeniable. He wasn't acting outside the army. He was rebuilding what the army was supposed to be. The shift came not with a roar, but with a reckoning. In early 2024, the nation stood at a crossroads. The people had grown tired of silence, of denial, of generals who made speeches while their homes burned. And then a wave of truth hit. Leaked documents. Maps marked non-priority zones. Internal memos dismissing civilian casualties as acceptable disruption. Voicemails. Eyewitness reports. Transcripts from ignored intelligence briefings, all pointing to one fact. Captain Traoré had warned them, pleaded, acted, and they had laughed. Now they weren't laughing. With public pressure mounting, investigations were launched. Military tribunals convened. Those once untouchable were now questioned under oath. And when Traoré was summoned to testify, he didn't walk in as a disgraced officer. He walked in as the nation's conscience. He brought no anger, no theatrics, only a folded paper, a list of names, villages saved, families protected, lives preserved because someone refused to follow silence. In front of the panel, he said, "Leadership isn't measured by who commands the loudest room. It's measured by who shows up when no one else will." The room fell silent. One by one, generals were stripped of rank, benefits revoked, lifetime bans issued, no prisons, just removal. Exile from the very institution they once corrupted. And in their place, a new structure began to rise, shaped not by medals, but by merit. At its head, the man once dismissed as soft. Now, the face of reform. As interim president, Traoré stood not at a podium, but in a rural village on his first day. No motorcade, just soldiers rebuilding a bridge behind him. He shook hands, spoke to children. When asked by a reporter why he came there first, he answered, "Because this is where I was ignored, and this is where everything began." History would not forget the ones who turned their backs, but it would remember the man who didn't.